Some memories don't fade. One of my hardest memories didn't happen at a crime scene. It happened inside the State Capitol Project Public Defender's Office in Little Rock. But before I tell you about that day, I need to take you back. In the early 90s, I was out doing what I always did, driving the city, reading the graffiti, looking for kids who would talk. I turned a corner and saw a knot of young men around a Channel 11 reporter. I knew most of those young boys, so I decided I should pull over. The reporter was Dinah Tyler, sharp as a tack, later a top administrator with corrections. She was covering the growing gang problem. She interviewed me, and she interviewed a brash young man named Timothy Davis. He was cocky, bold, soaking up the attention, young but deadly. I kept seeing him on the streets in the months that followed until he was finally arrested in connection with a murder. That was my first meeting with Timothy Davis, but it wouldn't be the last. Fast forward more than 20 years to the Public Defender's Office in Little Rock. Timothy Davis was brought in from Tucker Maximum Security, shackled, chained, cuffed. When I walked into Jackie Wright's office that day, we sat down and looked squarely at what he was facing. We went over his case. You know, it just wasn't his past. Timothy was about to stand trial for another murder charge. The evidence was strong, witnesses were ready, and the state was preparing to seek the ultimate penalty. Jackie, a capital and conflicts attorney, could see no real defensive strategy. The facts were what they were. The state had offered a plea, life without the possibility of parole, and she hoped I could change Timothy's hard-nosed plan to take it to a jury. In his world, eliminating witnesses was a real thing, and he believed he could beat the case that way. He was delusional about his odds, a young black man with his record facing a very conservative, rural Arkansas jury. My job that day was to break through that thinking and get him to take the plea. Before I stepped into the room, Jackie looked at me and said, "Good luck. His life is in your hands." I sat down across from Timothy and laid the truth out, plain and raw. I told him he had become institutionalized. I told him exactly what a jury would see, not a kid who made mistakes, but an animal they'd be asked to cage forever or kill. And I told him what would happen if he rolled the dice instead of taking the deal. He glared at me, eyes locked, full of anger and hate. Two armed guards that had brought him from the prison were watching from the next room, and they started toward the door. I waved them away. For a long moment, Timothy just sat there, burning holes through me with that stare, and then his head dropped. His eyes went to his feet. That was the moment I knew I had reached him. The bravado was gone, the fantasy of beating a murder case by killing witnesses gone. What was left was a young man finally staring at the truth and accepting his fate. At the end of that meeting, Timothy Davis, a man facing the death penalty, hugged me before the guards led him away. And me, I walked straight into the bathroom and vomited. That doesn't happen to me. I've stood over burned bodies, homicide victims, wrecks and tragedies. But this was different. Knowing a man's life had been balanced on the edge of my words, that broke through my armor. My conflict didn't end in that bathroom. Because while I had helped keep Timothy Davis from the execution chamber, I couldn't stop thinking about the people he left behind, the victims of his murders, rapes, and robberies, mothers, fathers, children, families who would never get their loved ones back. I've asked myself many times, what would they think if they knew I was part of sparing his life? Would they feel cheated of justice? That question has haunted me. I am not and could never be a criminal defense attorney in capital cases. I believe the death penalty protocol in this country, from the courtroom to the chamber, is convoluted and deeply troubling. And yet, when I look back on that day, I still carry both truths. I helped keep a murderer alive, and I could not justify in my own soul the state taking his life. In the end, Timothy Davis pled guilty. He'll die in prison, but not by execution. I'll never forget the glare, the silence, the hug of a condemned man, the sickness in my stomach, and the quiet conflict that still lingers in my mind. What does justice really look like when life and death are in your hands? That's the weight you carry when you walk with the dead, and sometimes with the living, whose fate hangs in the balance. Y'all be nice to one another, okay?